Man, it's good to be back, right? As Mike said last week, most of our campus ministry, myself included, we were gone at our spring retreat out in the middle of nowhere, Colorado. Yeah, woo! It was great, right? It was a time of great fun and fellowship, also just spiritual revival, right? We walked through the book of Ezekiel. If you haven't read Ezekiel in a while, myself being one of those people who hadn't read it in a while, it's good. Like, it's hard. It's intense. It's kind of messy, but it's good, right? The vision of the valley of dry bones in chapter 37 is just, it's so good, right? So we talked about all that. If you're wondering what the campus students got out of it, ask one of them after service. Be like, hey, what did you get out of the retreat? They would love to share with you. And thank you for praying for that time away. But as we were gone, you guys started a series without us, right? So you started the series entitled The Greatest Comebacks in the Bible, right? That's what we started last week. And we're going to be looking at 4 of the greatest comeback stories in the Bible as voted on by you. And I say by you because none of mine won, right? So voted on by you, right? And we're going to go through, and we're all leading up to Easter Sunday, right? And it's the greatest comeback story of all time with Jesus rising from the dead, right? And the first of our elected 4 stories was the story of Joseph. Right, and that's what Mike took us through last week. Did a great job walking through 13 chapters of this massive story over Genesis. Right, and it was just that reminder that from pit to prison to palace, God is faithful. Right, like God was faithful to Joseph, and hardships in our lives don't mean that God is absent. Right, He's not gone from us. In fact, He promises that He's right there with us in the hardest of times. Right, and it was the reminder that the story going on around us it's bigger than just you, right? Like God is doing things in and through you that affect people even down generations, right? We saw Joseph be a blessing to an entire nation and the people of Israel for his faithfulness. So this week, we're going to be looking at the story of Esther, right? And there's a little spoiler up here because my title's already up here, but pretend you don't see that. It's building suspense. It's not there yet, right? But we're looking through Esther, and Esther to me has the classic movie plot line. Right, like you have this unassuming, pretty main character who turns into the unlikely hero, right? And you have the vengeful, mean, evil villain who comes, and the only way that the hero can be the hero is by risking everything that is dear to her, right? And it ends in victory, right? That's the best part of good movies, is that they end in victory, right? We all want to see the good guy win, right? And that's exactly what the story of Esther is, right? She's an orphan refugee in a foreign empire. And by a wild turn of events, she becomes the queen of Persia. Then the evil Haman devises a way to kill all the Jews, right, Esther's people, living in Persia. And it comes down to Esther's courage to risk it all. That's the only thing that's going to save the people. So she goes before the king, right, and in the last hour, in the final hours of the book, everybody's saved, right? And everything turns out happily ever after, right? And it's a pretty cool story. To me, it's kind of like the Fast and the Furious, right? Predictable plot. But there's explosions, there's cool cars, there's a little bit of love story thrown in there for the wives to have to watch it with the husbands, right? There's all the makings of a really cool story. But I think the book of Esther is a little more than that, right? It's kind of like, who likes the Transformers movies in here? I know that this is debated, so it's fine if you didn't raise your hand. We can still be friends, right? The Transformers movies, does anyone know the slogan for the Transformers franchise? Yeah, more than meets the eye, because you didn't see that, right? That wasn't up there the whole time. It's more than meets the eye, right? They're more than just cars. They're robots from outer space here to protect the human race, right? Like there's more that meets the eye to that story, right? And it goes beyond just the cars and robots thing. Even their human protagonists are kind of like that, right? Shia LaBeouf plays a character that's this goober, total goober. But then he becomes this world saver, right? He gets the courage, and all of a sudden, he's partnering with these outer space robots to save the world, right? And Mark Wahlberg's character, Cade Yeager, the failed inventor, turned knight of legend, right? He gets this talisman, and it's cool. Amen. Watch the movies. But I think that in the same way that there's more to the characters and to the story of Transformers than what kind of meets the eye, I think there's more to Esther than what meets the eye. So hence our title that you already looked at, More Than Meets the Eye, right? Because Esther is more than just a pretty-faced queen, right? She is a courageous hero for the Israelites. And there's more to the story than even just what we read this morning, right? There's an eternal plot that's brewing behind all of this. So we're going to look at that as well. But our first point this morning is if you just have the courage to try. You know, the end of every Transformers movie has these cheesy but epic monologues by the leader of the Autobots, Optimus Prime, right? And in the fifth movie, it's The Last Night is what it's called. This is the line in the famous ending scenes. And I'm not going to do his voice because I can't. But it says, at the heart of every legend, there is truth. A few brave souls unite to save the world. We can be heroes in our own lives, every one of us, if we only have the courage to try. Right, and like I said, it's pretty cheesy, but it's really epic at the same time, right? We can be heroes, every one of us, if we only have the courage to try. Right, that's inspiring. I like that. But, I think that the choice to have courage is one that defined Esther's life, right? So let's hop into her story and see how it did. Esther chapter 1 opens up with King Xerxes, right? Or maybe if you have a different translation, it says King Ahasuerus, right? That's Xerxes. And I'm going to say Xerxes because it's a lot easier than the other name, right? We know Xerxes from history as well. But it opens up, Xerxes is throwing this 187-day long banquet. Like, what a party. Like, I joke with my wife, this week was her birthday. She gets a birthday week. Imagine 187 days of just partying, right? That's what they're doing. It's filled with just debauchery, drinking, all the things. During that banquet, Xerxes, in a drunken stupor, because he's been drinking the whole time, commands his wife Vashti to entertain his buddies with her beauty. Right? And I don't think I need to go into that in church, what that means. I think we understand not a great request of her. Right? She denies because she has dignity. So the king deposes her, right? Casting her out of her position as queen. Then his advisors tell him, hey, you should hold a beauty contest across the entire Persian Empire to find a new queen. Right? I know that you're all about the looks, so let's just find the pretty ones and bring them in. So that's where we meet our girl, Esther. Right? So Esther chapter 2, verses 5 to 7, says, now there was in a citadel of Susa a Jew from the tribe of Benjamin, named Mordecai, son of Jair, son of Shammai, son of Kish, who had been carried away into the exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. And he was among those taken captive when Jehoiakim was king of Judah. Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This young woman was also known as Esther. She had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Mordecai had taken her in as his own daughter when her father and mother died. So, little context, the book of Esther comes about 100 years after the Babylonian exile started. Right, so some Jews have returned to Jerusalem to rebuild the city, to rebuild the temple, but there's a lot that are just scattered. Right, and they're scattered across this massive, vast Persian empire. Right, the Persian Empire is now the ruling kingdom in the world. Right, and Esther and Mordecai are some of those who are scattered. Right, and it says that they live in a place called Susa. And we really don't learn much about Esther at this point. We learn that she's an orphan, right, that she lost both of her parents, and now she's being taken care of by Mordecai, her cousin. And we learn that she's pretty, right? That she had a lovely figure and was beautiful, right? The CSB says that she was extremely beautiful, right? So when, like, the Bible uses extremely beautiful or pleasant to look at, she was a looker, right? Like, she was a beautiful girl, right? So we meet her, but we also meet Mordecai, right? Mordecai is important here because we know that in the Bible, a person's name and their lineage has relevance. Right? Like, no one is like Cordell, son of Ed, son of Joe. Like, no one cares. Right? Those are my dad and grandpa's names. I didn't make those up, I promise. But no one asks me that anymore. But it mattered a lot in the Bible. And we see that with Mordecai. Right? It says Mordecai, he was a Benjamite, son of Jair, son of Shammai, son of Kish. And I want you to remember the name Kish, because that's going to come into play a little bit later. File it away. We're not going to talk about it anymore. We're moving on. Right? So let's keep going. Esther, because of her pleasing looks, becomes queen, right? And she keeps secret that she's a Jew, right? It's not really looking good for the king of Persia to marry a refugee within his kingdom, right? So we get to this moment in chapter 2 where Mordecai overhears a plot to assassinate the king, passes a message to Esther. Esther then tells the king kills the guys who are going to kill him, and everything goes on like normal. We're not going to talk about that. Really great part of the story. Read it on your own time. Right? There's a lot more to go through here. But directly following that moment, we get introduced to the main villain and conflict in our story. So after these events, and these events are Mordecai saving the king, right? It says that King Xerxes honored Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, elevating him and giving him a seat of honor higher than all the other nobles. All the royal officials at the king's gate knelt down and paid honor to Haman, for the king had commanded this concerning him. But Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor. The royal officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai, "Why do you disobey the king's command?" Day after day they spoke to him, but he refused to comply. Therefore they told Haman about it to see whether Mordecai's behavior would be tolerated, for he told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor, he was enraged. Yet, having learned who Mordecai's people were, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. Right, so kind of weird, right? Mordecai saves the king, and then all of a sudden, the very next verse, Haman. Like Haman is being lifted up. The timing's impeccable. You would think that Mordecai would naturally be lifted up, but we get Haman instead. And quickly here, another aside, I want you to file away the name Agag, right? So remember Kish and Agag, because those things are going to come in later, right? Haman is introduced as the Agagite, right? That's from the root of Agag, right? From the lineage of Agag. Right, so we'll keep going here. Everyone's bowing down to Haman except for Mordecai. And all the servants are like, dude, just do it. Like, why? Like, will you just bow down? Why are you disobeying? But he doesn't. And when Haman sees and hears that Mordecai is a Jew, he's filled with fury. Right, and he doesn't just want to kill him, but he wants to kill all of them. Right, he wants to exterminate the entire race. So Haman presents this decree to the king to destroy them. Right, and he's so desperate for it to pass that in chapter 3, verse 9, he actually bribes the king. He says, if it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them being the Jews, and I will give 10,000 talents of silver to the king's administrators for the royal treasury. You know, for all the nerds out there, that's a $161 million bribe. Right, this wasn't pocket change. Like, he was desperate to see the Jews destroyed. Right, and the king agrees to this decree, and he actually doesn't take the money, which, surprising. King of Persia, you would think he would want more money, but he doesn't. So Haman rolls some dice called Pur, to set a date, right? The date's the 13th of Adar. That's when all the Jews are going to be wiped out, right? Like, that's the day that all of Haman's men are going to go and attack the Jews and wipe them out completely. Right, and this is where we come to the climax and pivotal moment in Esther's story. So Mordecai tells Esther, she's in the palace, she doesn't know, right? No one knows that she's a Jew, so it's not like they're passing on the information. She doesn't know, so Esther tells her, hey, in 11 months, all of our people are going to be wiped out. You've got to do something. Like, you've got to do something to change this. Use your position. Like, go before the king, right? And she responds to his request with this, chapter 4, verse 11. She says, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death, unless the king extends the golden scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king. Right? She's like, because you don't know what you're asking for here. Like, I'm going to die. You can't just like walk in and be like, hey, Mark, can you do something about this? Like, it's not office hours, right? Like, you die if you walk before the king, right? And historically, Xerxes is anything but a gracious man, right? If you look at history, Xerxes was known for his harsh punishments, right? So it's not like she's just making up the fact that the king will kill her. She knows, and she's likely seen. We saw, like, Pete's sake, he cast out his own queen for not stripping for his friends, right? Like, he is harsh. Right? There was no way that she was going to get around it. So now sweet, beautiful Esther is no longer just a pretty face in the palace, but she's presented with a major dilemma, right? That she can stay silent and hope that no one figures out that she's a Jew, or at least for a little while, right? That she can at least enjoy the queenship for a little while longer and continue living in the palace. Or she can risk everything and approach the king and possibly save her people. Right, because just because she actually gets to talk to the queen or the king doesn't mean he's going to listen. Right, like if she makes it past the first line of defense, there's no promise that it's actually going to work. Now, I don't think many of us, at least not me, are faced with the possibility of death from a king on behalf of our people often. Probably ever, right? I think I'm safe to say that's not going to happen in this room. But we are all presented with the risky call of courage for Jesus every day, right? We all face decisions every day that require this kind of courage. Maybe it's the choice to talk to that one friend or neighbor who needs to hear about Jesus. And you know that you're probably the one who needs to tell them. But you also know there's a likelihood that that relationship might split, right? That they might not want to hear what you have to say, right? That they might feel hurt and intimidated or any of the following emotions at what you have to say, right? Or maybe it's deeper than that. Maybe they claim to be religious, but are missing some really key truths in Scripture. And you know that, man, I need to, for the sake of their souls, tell them the truth, but you're going to risk their friendship. Like, you know that if they take it wrong, you're probably never going to see them again, right? It's those kind of choices, right? Maybe it's the choice of dealing with the sin that's been plaguing you behind closed doors, and you know that it's slowly killing the rest of your life, and you know that getting open offers that healing, right? That's the next step that you need to take, but you're worried, right? What are people going to think? Are people going to not trust me anymore? Are people going to be upset with me, right? What are they going to think when they know this thing about me, right? It's the choice to do it anyway, right? Maybe it's the choice to pray a big prayer, being afraid of what happens if it doesn't get answered in your time or in your desired outcome. That takes courage, right? It takes courage to keep praying that big prayer, right? It's the choice to hold firm to conviction when everyone around you is compromising. It's the choice to break off a relationship you know is killing your faith, even if it hurts, right? It's the choice to prioritize God and his kingdom rather than the things that the world says are going to fill you up. I could go on, but we're all faced with moments that beg the question, do you have the courage to try? Like, do you have the courage to step out, get out of the comfortable, and do what you need to do, knowing that there's something that could be better out there? I know for me, man, I need courage to keep showing up. Sorry, Hudson didn't sleep, so I'm like, woo! I need courage to keep showing up on campus. Man, there's days that it's like I'm fired up, and I get out there, and every answer is a no. And it seems like there's never been an open person here, has there? Like, we're going to be stuck at this 6-person limit forever, right? Like, nothing's ever going to change. It's not true, but man, I need the courage to keep showing up. I think that we all have those moments, right? And whatever it is for you, we have a moment that we need to have the courage to try. And in the face of Esther's fear, Mordecai sends these words back to her. And he pleads with her to make the choice to have the courage, right? To make the choice to risk it all and save her people. So next scripture here, chapter 4, verse 12, but really verse 13. These are his words. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows, but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. He challenges Esther to see that, hey, maybe you've become queen for such a time as this. Right? That this isn't just a happy accident that got you on the throne, but this is why. Like, this is the very moment that you are sitting on the throne for. Right? And similarly, maybe God has brought you to whatever moment it is in your life for such a time as this. Right? Like, maybe you have that moment that God has been just waiting for such a time as this, for you to have the courage to step out and do something, right? Maybe you're in your neighborhood because that neighbor needs you to tell them about the truth because nobody else is, right? Maybe you're right on the verge of seeing God really move, but you have to keep showing up, right? Like, I know that I need that, right? Like, I have to keep showing up because maybe I'm right on the verge of God doing something amazing, right? Maybe if you would just get open about that sin, you would finally have the victory that you've been waiting for, right? Like, all of those moments, maybe it's for such a time as this. Maybe it's just right on the other side. I love Esther's response to this. Esther 4:16, she says this, "Go, gather all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will do as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even if it's against the law. And if I perish, I perish." And she's like, guys, everybody fast for me, and I'm just going to go. And if I perish, I perish. Esther wasn't given confirmation from God as to if her mission was going to work. Right? It says that she fasted, but she had decided she was going anyway. She wasn't asking God to say, hey, I'm going to open this door. The king's going to reach out a scepter. Everything's going to be fine. No, she's like, I've got to go. The people need me. I've got to go. So she fasted for courage. Right? She fasted so she would have the courage to step out and have the attitude of, if I perish, I perish. And this actually wasn't in my notes, but I think that we need to see where we also get courage from. You know who inspired that mentality? Mordecai. Esther obviously is the courageous one. Mordecai's like, do you realize what is on the line? That you might just be here for this moment. Guys, we need Mordecais. And we need to be Mordecais for each other. Right? There's a reason why in Hebrews it talks about encourage one another daily. Right? And it's not just like casually like patting somebody on the back, but it's putting courage into someone. Because we all need it. Right? There's all those moments where like, I don't have the courage to try anymore. Man, we need a Mordecai. Right? We need somebody who's going to come alongside us and push us to what God has going on. Right? But we also have to go to God for that. She fasts for the courage. Right? And she asks all the people around her to do it as well. She's like, man, I've got to do this. And I'm scared, but I got to have the courage. Let me go to God. Right? I love remembering those scriptures. Even for what I was sharing, I got to remember that God promises that there are people that he wants to save out there. Right? The harvest is plentiful. The workers are few, but the harvest is not. Right? I have got to be encouraged by the word of God. Right? I've got to find courage from the promises of God in those moments. And the story doesn't end there. It doesn't just end with her decision of courage, right? We see the outcome. She approaches the king, convinces him of their cause, and the Jews are saved, right? And the rest of the story is amazing. But like I said in the beginning, there's more to this story that meets the eye. It's not just about this moment. So point number 2 here, seeing the bigger picture. Now, this is where the book of Esther honestly gets really interesting to me. You know how I was talking about Transformers has this predictable plot? It's kind of how Esther feels. I'm like, yeah, she's going to win. But this is where it starts getting really cool. Esther is the one book in the Bible that never mentions God. Not once. Right? 4,932 words over 10 chapters. Not one of them is God, Lord, Jehovah, Yahweh, any of that. He's not mentioned one time. Right? And I got to say, I could have went on many tracks with this, right? The presence of God in this book, though he is not mentioned, is clear in so many ways. Take Mordecai sitting outside the gate, happening to hear an assassination attempt, right? Think about even just the fact that some orphan girl is now the queen of Persia, right? And then we move on, right? We get Haman here. He actually builds this spire to impale Mordecai because he's so angry with him. But then later on in the book, that's exactly how Haman dies, right? Like God serves justice through all of it, right? It's recorded that Mordecai helped save the king. And then one night the king can't sleep. And so he wakes up and he reads the chronicle that says that Mordecai saved him. And now Mordecai is being paraded around the city. God is present in the entire book. And we could have talked about all that. Study that out on your own. Like look for the fingerprints of God throughout the book of Esther. That's not what we're going to talk about though. If we read the story, it's pretty epic, right? Not only do the Jews actually not die, but they conquer the enemies, right? The counter decree is issued that they can defend themselves. So they do, and they wipe out all of Haman's people. And again, like I said, Haman gets impaled on the thing that he built to kill Mordecai with, right? Justice is served. Esther and Mordecai are heroes. But there's a bigger story and point to just the book. See, even though God is never mentioned, he's present offering a greater story than just a Persian queen beating a bad guy. Do you remember the names that I told you to file away earlier? Kish and Agag. That's good. I asked my wife that like 3 times this week, and she's like, I don't know. So amen. Kish and Agag, right? This conflict between Haman and Mordecai has roots that begin long before them. And that's where Kish and Agag are important. Let's take a field trip. Go to 1 Samuel chapter 9. You know, at this point in the book of 1 Samuel, Israel has just come out of the time of the judges, right? And if you read Judges, things were not good, right? They would get good for like a short period of time, and then it ends with, and the people of Israel did as they saw fit, right? That's like the end of every judge. Like nothing goes very well. So they're demanding of God, hey, God, we want a king. We want somebody to tell us what to do, as if the judges didn't do that. But they wanted a king. So God gives them over to that choice. 1 Samuel chapter 9, right? It says, there was a Benjaminite, right? We know that name too. A man of standing whose name was Kish, right? And I'm not going to read all the other names. Verse 2, Kish had a son named Saul. Okay, so we figure out why Kish is important. Maybe you didn't recognize that name right off the bat. I didn't. But we do know Saul, right? Saul is the first king of Israel. So that means if Mordecai and Esther are in the line of Kish, they're in the line of Saul, right? So they're descendants of Saul. Let's keep going. Let's read a little more about Saul. 1 Samuel 15, starting in verse 1. Right? Samuel says to Saul, I am the one that the Lord sent to anoint you king over his people of Israel. So now listen to the message from the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will punish the Amalekites, right? And we've heard about the Amalekites way back in the day in Exodus, right? But I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid them as they came up out of Egypt. Now go and attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. That's intense, right? God commands Saul, destroy the Amalekites completely, down to their livestock. Like, I don't want to see anything living and breathing coming out of the Amalekite people. Jump down to verse 7. It says, then Saul attacked the Amalekites all the way from Havilah to Shur, near the eastern border of Egypt. He took King Agag, right, there's our other name, of the Amalekites alive. And his people he totally destroyed with the sword. But Saul and the army spared Agag and the best of the sheep and the cattle, the fat calves and lambs, everything that was good. They were unwilling to destroy completely what was good, but everything that was despised and weak, they totally destroyed. Okay, so we meet Agag, right? Agag's the king of the Amalekites, this enemy of God's people. And Saul was supposed to destroy them completely. Agag included. What do we see? Saul doesn't. Saul keeps him. Right? So Saul disobeys God and takes Agag captive rather than killing him. So in Esther, this feud between Haman the Agagite, right, and Mordecai the Kishite, this has been coming for a long time. Right? There's some bad blood. Right? This is a wound that is being reopened. Why do you think Mordecai is like, or Haman is not, I'll just kill Mordecai. No, he's like, I want them all dead. Right? I've got issues with all the Jewish people. This is why, right? This is where it all comes in. You know, Saul's disobedience in 1 Samuel is what caused all of this, right? Is what's bringing all of this to start. But again, God being amazing author brings about redemption, right? And he does it from one of Saul's descendants, right? This isn't just happenstance that, you know, Saul's descendant and Agag's descendant are meeting here. And this is God writing a story of redemption, right? He's righting the wrong of Saul. He could have used anyone to finish that mission that Saul left incomplete. But he chose Esther, right? He chose Mordecai. He chose the line of Saul to rectify all that had gone wrong. You know, and it's cool because in the same way that God entrusted Esther to bring about redemption to the sin of Saul, and God trusts us with this mission of reconciliation and redemption to the world, right? And Jesus paid the price for us to do that. Go over to 2 Corinthians chapter 5. You know, again, the story is bigger than Esther and Haman. You know, chapter 5, verse 17, 2 Corinthians, it says, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old is gone, the new is here. All this is from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That God was reconciling the world to himself in Christ, not counting people's sins against them. And he has committed to us the message of reconciliation. We are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. God chooses to use us to accomplish his purposes in this world. Right? There's a bigger story going on, right? And we're a part of it. We're asked to be a part of it. You know, my favorite movie quote ever, not from Transformers, just to be clear, is what we do in life echoes in eternity. Right? Gladiator. Oh, it's one of the best movies out there. Watch that one over Transformers. But what we do in life echoes in eternity, right? Just like the story of Esther, God is doing more in and through us than what we see right now, right? And we've been entrusted with a rescue mission that's started long, long ago, and he wants to include us in on it. But he's chosen you to be a part of that. He's chosen you to matter in an eternal scheme and plan. But guess what? It gets one level bigger, right? This is where we'll land the plane and we'll have our time of communion before we close with the song. But the sin of one man being redeemed by the courage of another man is not a story that is just about Haman and Esther, nor is it ending with Saul and Agag. It's about Jesus. It's all about Jesus, right? And Paul speaks to this reality in Romans 5, starting in verse 17. He's speaking of the grace found in Jesus. He says, "For if by the trespass of one man, being Adam, death reigned through that one man, how much more will those who receive God's abundant provision of grace and the gift of righteousness reign in life through the one man, Jesus Christ? Consequently, just as one trespass resulted in the condemnation for all people, so also one righteous act resulted in justification and life for all people. For just as through the disobedience of one man many were made sinners, so also through the obedience of one man many will be made righteous." Saul sinned, and the Jews were condemned for it. But Esther redeemed it, right? Adam sinned. We've all sinned as a result. Now Jesus is redeeming it, right? And I know that we're going to talk about this at Easter. I don't care, right? God wrote the story for thousands of years over and over again. We're going to talk about it every week because it's good, like so good. Like God has been working this out from cover to cover. There's this thread of Jesus all the time, right? He's been working on redemption for so long. Right? That's the story of comeback. Right? That's the best story all the time. You know, the only difference here is that in Jesus' version of the story, when he risked it all, yes, he saved the people. And yes, he completed the mission, but he lost it all too. And he died on a cross. Esther remained queen, right? Mordecai got promoted. Jesus died on a cross. That's the only difference here. So as we end and we take our communion today, guys, remember that even with the book of Esther, there's more that meets the eye, right? There's more going on here. Yes, she is an amazing example of courage, one that we stand to learn from. Man, it's bigger than that. Right? Like this is just the continuation of redemption from cover to cover that God has been writing forever. You know, and he plans to bring us into the plot if we're willing. You know, what's the quote from our series? A setback is a setup for a comeback. You know, God is using Jesus as the setup, right, to rectify the setback by Adam and every single one of us so we can come back. So we can come back to him. So as we take communion this morning, gosh, I just encourage you, meditate on the courage of Jesus exhibited on the cross. Right? Meditate on the sacrifice of Jesus and just the grandeur of the story that God's been writing from the very beginning that's coming to you. Right? That he wants you in it.